Previously on Reconstructing the Great Sphinx, I ended it with master sketches next. All right, everyone, before I go there, let's briefly look at some past historical images. In ancient Egypt, portraits of kings, queens, priests, and commoners alike were stylistically sculptured and painted. There was very little attempt to make them look as the individuals that they were. There were, of course, exceptions, and I'd like to take a look at some of those exceptions because it tells you something about the skill level of the ancient Egyptian artists. The examples seen here clearly demonstrate that the ancient Egyptian artisans, or at least some of them, were able to capture a likeness and put feeling into the work of art. Now, this is an important thing because feeling is an intrinsic part of the human experience, especially how we relate to one another. And being able to identify each other visually is an important part of it. And when a portrait artist achieves that end, you've captured the character of an individual. And this is an important point because I'll be drawing a parallel here as it pertains to my interest in reconstructing a likeness of the Great Sphinx. Now take a look at this etching done in 1610. It's one of the earliest attempts at drawing the Sphinx. So what are we seeing here? Well, to me it looks like the work of two or more artists. In the foreground, we have some men on donkeys, and they're done in a different style from the Great Sphinx. And the pyramids are in a completely different style altogether. The Sphinx head itself looks like a study sketch. Interestingly enough, the Nemes headdress is drawn damaged, which is accurate. I know this because I saw photographs from the 1870s and 80s that show it much like it is drawn here. So that part of the drawing is verifiable. The face, however, is an entirely different matter. The artist here chose to draw the face based on an assumption, filling in the gaps of his knowledge with an imaginative leap of fancy. This is important for two reasons. It tells us that the Sphinx's face was as shattered then as it is now, and it demonstrates what artists do when confused about what they're seeing. They improvise and fill in the void of understanding with an assumption, and in this case, imagined the head to be that of an Ethiopian woman, and drew it accordingly. This next drawing, 1653, is an example of an artist basing his idea completely on hearsay. Total imagination, complete fabrication. The nose is a travesty. I don't think there's much we need to say about this one, other than that it's an example of just pure whimsy. This etching was done in 1755. The artist here has the damage on the Nemes headdress, nicely done, but the pattern on it is a demonstration that he never actually looked at it or understood it. It's a starburst shape, and the actual one is not starburst. But, you know, he can be forgiven for that. Many artists have tried their hands at this, and few have succeeded. You really do have to understand a little bit about Egyptian styles in the Nemes headdress designs, the stripe patterns, before you can really get a grasp of what you're seeing. From a layman's point of view, you're looking up at it and you're thinking, what is that? You see stripes and they're varying in shapes and widths, and the interesting thing about all of that is that you're looking at a shattered face, so badly damaged, you've got your hands full just trying to put that one together, let alone worrying about the stripes on the Nemes headdress. This one was done in 1798. And so again we have an artist who is laboring under false assumptions. To him, the face of the Sphinx was a woman, and the Nemes headdress, hair. He did not recognize it as the royal headdress of a pharaoh. As an artist, there are things you will be looking at that you do not understand, and because you don't understand it, you're going to be adding things into it as you go. And artists do this all the time. Now that's fine when you're drawing and painting landscapes, but it's no good for portraits. You need to be able to understand what you're seeing. You need to be able to search out and find the character of that which you're drawing or painting. And in the case of the Great Sphinx, I would think that trying to make it look like that particular monument is in itself something like painting or drawing a portrait. So when photography comes online, we have a tool that can help us to understand what is actually there. And given that the face of the Great Sphinx is so badly damaged, photography will be an absolute necessity in putting this Humpty Dumpty back together again. The etchings here are from a book called The Description of Egypt. It came out in 1802 and 1829. This book was possible only because of Napoleon Bonaparte's military and scientific campaigns into Egypt in 1798. So you're seeing the results of the scholars who had accompanied him. Obviously in the field they did sketches, and then when they got back to France, they did these etchings. The versions of the Great Sphinx here look very much like what we actually see in photographs. So the artists were observing this and trying their best to come up with an authentic representation of the Great Sphinx, and they got very close. But when cameras come along, that's when things begin to change. This next one was done in 1839. The artist David Roberts did a very romantic watercolor, and his paintings are very, very good. Very realistic looking, natural, and this is before photography. But David Roberts' painting here, it doesn't look like the Sphinx. It's another one of these interpretations with a whiff of whimsy about it. Now this is the one that's a game changer. Painted by Jean-Léon Gérôme in 1867. This, I believe, is a firm example of the use of photographic references. I'm not saying that the artist traced the photographs. What I'm saying is that he used them as references, because this, as far as I can tell, is assumption-free and exactly what we see in the photographs of the 1870s. With photo references, you have the luxury of time to distill the information, really get an idea of what it is you're seeing. And if your skills are up to the task, you should get an accurate rendering of the subject at hand, which in this case is the Great Sphinx. I'm well aware that some artists would argue about what I've just said, but in this project of reconstructing the Great Sphinx, I will demonstrate, or I hope to demonstrate, what I've just proposed. That photo references can help an artist get past their assumptions and their misperceptions about what it is they're actually looking at. In the 1970s, this was my first attempt to reconstruct the Great Sphinx. Obviously, even back then, I had it in my mind that I would like to see what this thing looked like before it was damaged. Even though I was looking at a photograph, you can see where my assumptions about what I was seeing still got the better of me. There is a lot in the face, the reconstructed face, that is pure fancy. Over the years, I like to think that I've familiarized myself more with the Egyptian styles in painting and drawing. But I was having a rough ride of it, getting a likeness of this face. I was constantly being derailed by my own assumptions and ignorance. In 1985, I did another reconstruction attempt based on an ink drawing by Wells Bosworth. His ink drawing was done sometime in the late 1800s. So my pencil sketch was based on his ink sketch, which was in turn based on a photograph. I redrew the nose in Procreate because my initial original wasn't quite up to snuff, pun intended. In 2014, I did a reconstruction drawing of the Great Sphinx looking at it straight on. Well, to me, that doesn't look anything like the Sphinx now, after I've studied it for at least the last couple of months, I'd say. This was the turning point where I began to realize that the Sphinx was so badly damaged that I was having a real tough time just reconstructing it by direct observation of the photos. Now, obviously, I wasn't in Egypt and I wasn't drawing it from life. I had a number of photos all around me, and from them I was trying to draw this likeness. The confounding thing is that drawing from photographs is actually easier than drawing from life, but that's not the way it was turning out. So that was in 2018. Let's go back a little bit here. August the 12th, 2014. This drawing was based on Mark Leonard's book, The Complete Pyramids, Solving the Ancient Mysteries. It was an excellent book. There were schematics of the Sphinx in that book, and I based this drawing on those schematics, but I did a full reconstruction of the body and the head. The Egyptians were sticklers for proportion, and this was an obvious deviation away from that proportion. Now it tells you, I thought, from what I read from Robert Schock and Robert Temple, who had come across this phenomena well before I did and noticed that the head was too small for the body. It indicated that the head was probably recarved once, twice, who knows how many times. The Great Sphinx is very, very old, thousands of years old, 4,000, 5,000. Now they're beginning to say it might even be 10,000 years old. Well, that's a lot of time, and in a lot of time, a lot of damage would be done to that sculpture. The reason for this drawing was to demonstrate the smallness of the head in comparison to the body. And I think it does a pretty good job of that. It also gives you a little bit of indication of what the shoulders of the Great Sphinx might have looked like. And also I put a little person right at the paws. You can get a sense of the dimension of this incredibly large monument. The head and face of the Sphinx appear to be a mishmash of Old, the Middle, and the New Kingdom. That's some 3,000 years of history. The beard, which resides in the British Museum in fragments, now that's New Kingdom design, and the Nimes headdress pattern is from Middle Kingdom design. So that sort of supports the idea that the Sphinx has been recarved many times over the millennia. And now I want to show you an ear. And here we have a sculpture in clay of the ear that I propped up beside a photograph and made an ear comparison. And as you can see here, even in this, I became victim to my assumptions. That ear looks too realistic. It doesn't look like it's in the Egyptian style. So I have to keep that in mind when I'm about to do the sculpture. Now, because my assumptions were always leading me astray, I searched the internet for a picture of the Great Sphinx that was almost at eye level. What I was looking for was a symmetrical view of the Sphinx. And of course, I did discover something interesting. It's a little asymmetrical, kind of like what a real human being is like. The left side of our face, and body for that matter, does not perfectly match the right side. So using this photograph, and in my iPad, in the Procreate app, and with my iPencil, I traced over the photograph to get a nice outline that I would then use to help guide me in the pencil sketch that was to come. The reason for that was so that I could hopefully put together some of the shattered elements, and that's what you see in this drawing here. From that Procreate test sketch, I then generated these reconstructions. One of them, of course, is the stone monument put back together again somewhat without any of the Nimes headdress pattern in place. And the second one, of course, I added the eyes and I added the Nimes headdress that follows precisely that pattern that is on the monument itself. I did not augment it or adjust it in any way, but rather I followed as closely as I could the pattern that is clearly visible on the monument today. So it gives you good insight of what the face of the Sphinx looked like, probably in Roman times, and possibly even in the New Kingdom, well over 3,000 years ago. I finally decided I'd do a drawing of the face, but I decided I would do a drawing of it from the 1870s, around there, when the Great Sphinx was not patched up yet. The reason why I went through that little exercise is you get a sort of feel for the thing. And remember, I mentioned this earlier about portrait artists catching a likeness or searching for a likeness, and they feel their way through it. You get a sense of the character. And the only way I can describe that is like a feeling. You could even say that it's almost like getting the likeness and the character of the subject. There is a difference between getting the character of a living human being versus that of a statue. Actually, it's a lot tougher. Living human beings have obvious characteristics, emotion, you can see the twinkle in their eyes, and you can get a sense of that character. In sculpture, on the other hand, such things are not so obvious and usually a lot subtler, hence why I say it's a little more difficult. But remember what I said earlier about Egyptian sculpture, that some of the artists were able to catch, or rather put a little bit of feeling into their likenesses. They were actually able to get a likeness of a particular person. Now, I admit it's not like a modern day version of photorealism, but that's not the point. The ancient Egyptians never wandered too far away from their unique style and their sense of proportion. Nevertheless, they were able to add character into their sculptures. And it's that sense of character that I'm trying to rediscover from the shattered face of the Great Sphinx. And so here you have it, my best effort so far. After months of taking a deeper look at the Sphinx and various details of the cobra head and Nimes patterns in ancient Egyptian styles, not to mention putting the eyelids back into place, and most importantly, that nose, This is as fine a version of assumption-free drawing of this great Sphinx that I've been able to achieve, and it's not the last word on it. All right, so in this drawing, I set myself the task of reconstructing the Sphinx as it appeared during the time of Thutmose IV. A stela placed between the Sphinx's paws tells the tale of this pharaoh's dream, and where after a morning's hunt on the Giza Plains, he took a nap under the Sphinx, which was even back then buried up to its neck in sand. And in that dream, the Sphinx spoke to him, proclaiming that if he freed the great god from the sand, the kingship of Egypt would be his. Thutmose was but a prince at the time. Well, the young man acted upon his dream, and the rest is history. That all took place some 3,500 years ago. And finally, we come to the master drawings. I'll be working on these, adjusting and tweaking until I get it just right. And I have my hands full trying to do this. You have a tear duct that is still intact here, and a corner of an eye over there, and a bit of the arc of the eye left that is badly hammered, chiseled, brutalized, vandalized. Yes, quite the Humpty Dumpty to put back together again. And there you have it. Lots more to come. So thanks for watching, and for the love of Moses, hit that subscribe button.